The Philippine Congress has just taken a significant step by approving the proposed Maritime Zones Bill, which will lay the groundwork for the country's new standard map. This map will clearly outline the rights and entitlements of Filipinos over the nation's maritime zones, with a special focus on the areas in the West Philippine Sea. In a coordinated effort, the Congressional Bicameral Conference Committee, composed of members from both the Senate and the House of Representatives, has submitted the final version of Senate Bill No. 2492 and House Bill No. 7819 to the Office of the President. The moment the President signs this bill, it will be officially enacted into law. This bill is more than just a piece of legislation. It's a pivotal move towards organizing the country's archipelagic boundaries and aligning the Philippines' domestic laws with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS. Once this measure is in place, it will formally declare the nation's maritime zones in accordance with international standards, reinforced by the landmark 2016 arbitral ruling. The main goal of the Maritime Zones Bill is to establish the geographical extent of the Philippines' maritime domain and define the legal powers the country can exercise within these zones. This forthcoming law will also serve as the foundation for updating the administrative map of the Philippines. It will specifically highlight key areas such as the Kalayaan Island Group, Scarborough Shoal, Macclesfield Bank, and the West Philippine Sea. Additionally, the Philippines' Exclusive Economic Zone, EEZ, extending 200 nautical miles west of the archipelago, will be officially named the West Philippine Sea, while the waters beyond this boundary will continue to be recognized as the South China Sea. This bill isn't just about drawing lines on a map. It's about securing the Philippines' rightful place in the global maritime landscape and asserting the nation's sovereignty over its waters. The Department of Foreign Affairs of the Philippines has announced a major step forward with the new Maritime Zones Law, which will officially define the status and boundaries of the waters within the country's archipelagic baselines. This law will also redefine the extent of the Philippines' territorial sea, including the contiguous zone. By clearly delineating the maritime zones and boundaries, this law is poised to become a cornerstone policy that addresses various institutional challenges, advancing the Philippines' national interests. It will focus on protecting, maximizing, and ensuring the sustainability of the country's marine resources. Additionally, the law will provide clear guidance on the rights and entitlements of the Philippines in different maritime zones, which will be crucial in achieving the objectives of other related maritime laws. The maritime zones of the Philippines include internal waters, archipelagic waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, EEZ, and the continental shelf. Each territory within the Philippines will generate its own maritime zones according to international law. The country will exercise full sovereignty and jurisdiction over its archipelagic waters, as well as the airspace, seabed, and subsoil within these defined maritime zones, in accordance with the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and other existing laws and treaties. The law also emphasizes the importance of the country's extended continental shelf, particularly in the Philippine Rise and West Palawan regions. In June, the Philippines filed a claim regarding the West Palawan regions before the United Nations Commission on the limits of the continental shelf. One of the most significant aspects of this law is that it will be the first time the term West Philippine Sea is officially embodied, mentioned, and referred to in a law passed by the Philippine Congress. Once enacted, the law will underscore the Philippines' sovereign rights and jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea, especially concerning the exploration, exploitation, and management of natural resources, as well as the development of artificial islands and structures in the area. The 2016 arbitral ruling, which invalidated China's sweeping claims over almost the entire South China Sea, will serve as a key foundation for this law. This legislation will solidify the Philippines' stance and ensure that the country's rights are protected and upheld in the face of external challenges. The Philippines' Maritime Zones Law is set to be Manila's formal counterpunch to China's aggressive territorial claims, marked by the infamous 10-dash line on its new standard national map, released just last August. This map brazenly claims almost the entire South China Sea as part of China's territory, directly overlapping with the exclusive economic zones, EEZs, of the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Vietnam, and Indonesia. China, unsurprisingly, has reacted strongly against this bill, filing a stern protest with Philippine authorities. Experts caution that China's resolve and capacity to defend its claimed sovereignty in the South China Sea should not be taken lightly. The Philippines might soon face even more assertive and forceful actions from Beijing, aimed at defending what it sees as its legal rights in the region. China has made it clear that it strongly opposes the Philippines' efforts to reinforce the 2016 tribunal ruling on the South China Sea arbitration through domestic legislation. Beijing argues that this ruling unlawfully encroaches on China's sovereignty by including Huangyandao and the majority of the Nansha Islands within the Philippines' maritime jurisdiction. This latest move by Manila suggests that the legal battle between the two nations might only intensify in the future. Just last month, the Philippines officially submitted a proposal to the United Nations, seeking to establish the entitlement to an extended continental shelf in the West Philippine Sea. This submission aims to define the outer boundaries of the continental shelf beyond the 200 nautical miles mark in the South China Sea, potentially bypassing China altogether and opening the door to maritime border negotiations with other nations. Moreover, Manila might even consider launching new international lawsuits, particularly on issues related to marine environmental protection in the South China Sea. The Philippine government has already taken a step in this direction, with its mission to the UN in New York submitting detailed information to the UN Commission on the limits of the continental shelf. After more than 15 years of meticulous scientific research, the Philippines has made a bold move to assert its rights over an undersea shelf in the South China Sea, specifically off the western coast of Palawan Province. This submission to the United Nations is more than just a claim. It's a declaration of the Philippines' maritime entitlements under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, and a testament to the nation's commitment to responsibly applying international law. The Philippines emphasized the critical importance of this submission in securing its sovereign rights and maritime jurisdiction in the West Philippine Sea. The 2016 arbitral ruling on the South China Sea confirmed these entitlements, rejecting any claims that exceeded the geographical and legal limits set by UNCLOS. The area in question includes the Spratly Islands, a chain of islands, islets, reefs, and atolls that has been the focus of fierce disputes over the years involving China, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan. Earlier this month, during the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. laid out the legal foundation for the country's territorial boundaries and sovereign rights. President Marcos emphasized that the Philippines has defined its territory and maritime zones in a manner that reflects its role as a responsible and law-abiding member of the international community. He highlighted that the country's boundaries are not a product of imagination, but are grounded in international law. From the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution to treaties like the Treaty of Paris and the Treaty of Washington, the Philippines has consistently adhered to international agreements that define its sovereignty. Moreover, President Marcos pointed out that the 1982 UNCLOS and the binding 2016 arbitral award solidify what the Philippines holds by legal right. However, the Philippines' submission to the UN for an extended continental shelf in the West Philippine Sea has not gone unchallenged. Both China and Malaysia have raised protests, with Vietnam also submitting its own claim for an extended continental shelf in the South China Sea. China, in particular, has been vocal in its opposition, sending a note verbally to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, urging the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf not to consider the Philippines' submission. China firmly disputes the Philippines' claim to a 200 nautical mile extended continental shelf in the West Palawan region, arguing that it lacks any legitimate basis and significantly violates China's sovereignty and jurisdiction in the South China Sea. According to China, it has indisputable sovereignty over Nansha Kundao, referred to as the South China Sea Islands, and the surrounding waters, asserting control over the seabed and subsoil in those regions. This area includes the Spratly Islands, located west of Palawan, which is now at the center of the Philippines' recent claim. China's stance on the issue underscores its firm belief in its sovereign rights over these waters, which encompass 4 major island chains in the contested South China Sea. Meanwhile, Malaysia has also raised objections to the Philippines' submission to the United Nations, aiming to officially recognize its undersea continental shelf. Malaysia asserts that the Philippines' claim encroaches on territory projected from the baselines of Sabah, a state in Malaysia. In a formal note to UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres on June 27th, Malaysia's permanent mission to the United Nations expressed that it has never acknowledged the Philippines' claim to Sabah. Malaysia requested that the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf refrain from examining and validating the Philippines' partial submission. The Malaysian government strongly rejected the Philippines' claim, arguing that the Philippines' continental margin is unjustly projected from Malaysian territory. Malaysia emphasized that Sabah has always been an integral part of its nation, recognized by both the United Nations and the international community since the Federation of Malaysia was established on September 16, 1963. The Malaysian government has flatly rejected the Philippines' claims of legal ownership and sovereignty over the Malaysian state of Sabah. In a strong statement, Malaysia made it clear that the Philippines' assertions have absolutely no basis under international law. Meanwhile, Vietnam has joined the fray by filing its own claim with the United Nations to extend its continental shelf in the South China Sea. This move follows closely on the heels of a similar submission by the Philippines, highlighting the escalating tensions in these contested waters, particularly amid China's growing assertiveness. According to Vietnam's state-run media, the government submitted its claim to a UN commission on Wednesday. The request aims to extend Vietnam's continental shelf beyond its exclusive economic zone, specifically targeting central areas of the disputed South China Sea. Vietnam's foreign ministry confirmed that the submission seeks to push the boundary beyond the current 200 nautical miles from its territorial waters, while also reaffirming Vietnam's sovereignty over the Hoang Sa, Paracel, and Trong Sa, Spratly archipelagos, claims that it asserts are fully aligned with international law. In a simultaneous move, Vietnam sent a formal note to the UN Secretary-General, articulating its position regarding the Philippines' similar submission the previous month. The Philippines responded by expressing its willingness to engage with Vietnam to find a mutually beneficial resolution to the South China Sea disputes, emphasizing the need to abide by international law. However, these developments have not gone unnoticed by China. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson voiced strong opposition to both Vietnam's and the Philippines' recent submissions, warning that such actions will only deepen the differences and friction in the region rather than help resolve the underlying disputes. Vietnam's latest move, formally seeking validation from the UN for the outer boundaries of its legal continental margin, is a clear indication of the country's resolve to secure its claims in the South China Sea. The submission aims to extend Vietnam's recognized territory beyond the 200 nautical mile limit, further intensifying the complex and ongoing territorial struggle in this highly strategic and contested maritime area. If its claim was recognized, Hanoi would gain exclusive rights to exploit natural resources on the extended continental shelf under the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Vietnam's submission came after the Philippines filed a similar request in June, seeking to confirm the extent of its continental seabed in the western part of Palawan Province in the South China Sea. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesman Lin Jian said on Thursday that Vietnam's unilaterally submitted claim included maritime areas encompassing parts of the Spratly Islands and infringed upon China's territorial sovereignty and merit. Time writes, Beijing and Hanoi have competing claims in the Spratly Islands, known in China as the Nansh Islands. UNCLOS requires claims for an extended continental shelf to be validated through a formal and scientific process by the CLCS. Beijing has sweeping claims covering almost all of the South China Sea. However, the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Taiwan all have competing claims to the waterway, which serves as a global shipping hub. Vietnam presented a diplomatic note to the Secretary-General of the UN on Thursday, rejecting the Philippines' claim to an extended continental shelf. According to the note, Manila's claim encroaches upon Vietnam's 200 nautical mile continental shelf and violates Vietnam's inherent sovereign rights and jurisdiction. Hanoi also requested the Commission to refrain from considering Manila's submission until all relevant issues between Vietnam and the Philippines were resolved. In 2009, Vietnam filed a claim regarding the northern part of the South China Sea. That same year, it also filed a joint submission with Malaysia with respect to the southern part of the South China Sea. However, the Commission deferred consideration of the two separate submissions by Malaysia and Vietnam, as well as their joint submission. When a deferral occurs, the CLCS will not make recommendations regarding the outer limits of the continental shelf extending beyond 200 nautical miles. Only the outer limits established based on the recommendations of the CLCS will become legal and binding. Thanks for watching. What do you think about this approval? Kindly share your thoughts in the comment section.